"Here we are, Sarah," said Captain Crewe, making his voice sound as cheerful as possible. Then he lifted her out of the cab and they mounted the steps and rang the bell. Sarah often thought afterwards that the house was somehow exactly like Miss Minchin. It was respectable and well furnished, but everything in it was ugly, and the very armchairs seemed to have hard bones in them. In the hall, everything was hard and polished. Even the red cheeks of the moon face of the tall clock in the corner had a severe varnished look. The drawing room into which they were ushered was covered by a carpet with a square pattern upon it. The chairs were square, the heavy marble timepiece stood upon the heavy marble mantel. As she sat down in one of the stiff mahogany chairs, Sarah cast one of her quick looks around. "I don't like it, Papa," she said, "but then I dare say that soldiers, even brave ones, don't really like going into battle." Captain Crewe laughed outright at this. He was young and full of fun, and he never tired of hearing Sarah's queer little speeches. "Oh, Sarah," he said, "what shall I do when I have no one to say solemn things to me? No one else is quite as solemn as you are." "But," inquired Sarah, "why do solemn things make you laugh?" He smiled and answered, laughing still more, "Because you are such fun when you say them." Then suddenly he swept her into his arms and kissed her very hard, stopping laughing all at once and looking almost as if tears had come into his eyes. It was just then that Miss Minchin entered the room. She was very much like her house, Sarah felt, tall and dull, respectable and ugly. She had large, cold, fishy eyes and a large, cold, fishy smile. It spread itself into a very large smile when she saw Sarah and Captain Crewe. She had heard a great many desirable things of the young soldier from the lady who had recommended her school to him. Among other things, she had heard that he was a rich father who was willing to spend a great deal of money on his little daughter. "It will be such a great privilege to have charge of such a beautiful and promising child, Captain Crewe," she said, taking Sarah's hand and stroking it. "Lady Meredith has told me of her unusual cleverness. A clever child is a great treasure in an establishment like mine." Sarah stood quietly, with her eyes fixed upon Miss Minchin's face. She was thinking something odd, as usual. She was thinking, "Why does she say I am a beautiful child? I am not beautiful at all. Colonel Granger's little girl, Isabel, is beautiful. She has dimples and rose-coloured cheeks and long hair the colour of gold. I have short black hair, green eyes, besides which I'm a thin child and not fair in the least. I'm one of the ugliest children I ever saw. She is beginning by telling a story." Sarah was mistaken, however, in thinking that she was an ugly child. She was not in the least like Isabel Grange, who had been the beauty of the regiment, but she had an odd charm of her own. She was a slim, supple creature, rather tall for her age, and had an intense, attractive little face. Her hair was heavy and quite black, and only curled at the tips. Her eyes were a greenish grey, it is true, but they were big, wonderful eyes with long black lashes, and though she herself did not like the colour of them, many other people did. Still, she was very firm in her belief that she was an ugly little girl, and she was not at all elated by Miss Minchin's flattery. Sarah thought in her mind, she still thought, I would be telling a story if I said she was beautiful. And by telling a story, that was her way of saying telling a lie, a story, a lie. This whole thing is a story, but if you tell a story, that means you're telling a lie. I should know that I was telling a story. I believe that I am as ugly as she is in my own way. Whatever did she say that for? After Sarah had known Miss Minchin longer, she learned why she had said it. She discovered that she said the very same thing to each papa and mamma who brought a child to the school. Sarah stood near her father and listened while he and Miss Minchin talked. She had been brought to the seminary because Lady Meredith's 2 little girls had been educated there, and Captain Crewe had a great respect for Lady Meredith's experience. Sarah was to be what was known as a parlour boarder, and was to enjoy even greater privileges than parlour boarders usually did. She was to have a pretty bedroom and a sitting room all of her own. She was to have a pony and a carriage, and a maid to take the place of the ayah who had been her nurse in India. Captain Crewe, with a gay little laugh, said, "I am not in the least anxious about her education." He held Sarah's hand and patted it. "The difficulty will be to keep her from learning too fast and too much. She is always sitting with her little nose burrowing into books. She doesn't read them, Miss Minchin. She gobbles them up as if she were a little wolf instead of a little girl. She is always starving for new books to gobble. She wants grown-up books, great big fat ones, French and German as well as English, history and biography and poets and all sorts of things. Drag her away from her books when she reads too much. Make her ride her pony out in the row and go out and to buy a new doll. She ought to play more with dolls." "Papa," said Sarah, "you see, if I went out and bought a new doll every few days, I should have more than I could be fond of. Dolls ought to be intimate friends. Emily is going to be my intimate friend." Captain Crewe looked at Miss Minchin, and Miss Minchin looked at Captain Crewe. "Who is Emily?" Miss Minchin inquired. Captain Crewe smiled and said, "Tell her, Sarah." Sarah's green-grey eyes looked very solemn and quite soft as she answered, "She is a doll that I have not yet found. She is a doll Papa is going to buy for me. We are going out together to find her. I have called her Emily. She is going to be my friend when Papa is gone. I want her to talk to about him." Miss Minchin's large, fishy smile became very flattering indeed. "Oh, what an original child! What a darling little creature!" "Yes," said Captain Crewe, drawing Sarah close. "She is a darling little creature. Take great care of her for me, Miss Minchin." Sarah stayed with her father at his hotel for several days. In fact, she remained with him until he sailed away again back to India. They went out and visited many big shops together and bought many great things, or bought a great many things. They bought, indeed, a great many more things than Sarah needed, but Captain Crewe was a rash, innocent young man and wanted his little girl to have everything she admired and everything that he admired himself. So between them, they collected a wardrobe much too grand for a child of 7. There were velvet dresses trimmed with costly fur, and lace dresses, and embroidered ones, and hats with great soft ostrich feathers, and ermine coats and muffs, and boxes of tiny gloves, and handkerchiefs, and silk stockings in such abundant supply that the polite young women behind the counters whispered to each other that the odd little girl with big solemn eyes must be at least some foreign princess, perhaps the little daughter of an Indian Rajah. At last they found Emily, but they went to a number of toy shops and looked at a great many dolls before they finally discovered her. "I want her to look as if she wasn't a doll, really," Sarah said. "I want her to look as if she listens when I talk to her. The trouble with dolls, Papa," she put her head to one side and she reflected as she said this, "the trouble with dolls is that they never seem to hear." So they looked at big ones and little ones, at dolls with black eyes and dolls with blue eyes, at dolls with brown curls and dolls with golden braids, dolls dressed, dolls undressed. "You see," Sarah said, when they were examining one who had no clothes, when I find her, she has no frocks, we can take her to a dressmaker and have her things made to fit. They will fit better if they are tried on, you see." After a number of disappointments, they decided to walk and look in at the shop windows and let the cab follow them. They had passed 2 or 3 places without even going in, when, as they were approaching a shop, which was not really a very large one, Sarah suddenly started like that. She clutched at her father's arm. "Oh, Papa!" Sarah cried. "There is Emily!" A flush had risen to her face, and there was an expression in her green-grey eyes as if she had just recognized someone she was intimate with and fond of. "She is actually waiting for us," she said. Let us go in and get her." "Dear me," said Captain Crewe, "I feel as if we ought to have someone introduce us." "Well, you must introduce me, and I will introduce you," said Sarah. "But I knew her the minute I saw her, so perhaps she knew me too." Perhaps Emily had known Sarah. She had certainly a very, very intelligent expression in her eyes when Sarah took her in her arms. She was a large doll, but not too large to carry around easily. She had naturally curling golden brown hair, which hung like a mantle around her, and her eyes were a deep, clear grey blue with soft, thick eyelashes, which were real eyelashes and not merely painted lines. "Of course," said Sarah, looking into her face as she held her on her knee. "Of course, Papa, this is Emily." So Emily was bought and actually taken to a children's outfitter's shop and measured for a wardrobe as grand as Sarah's own. She had lace frocks too, and velvet and muslin ones, and hats and coats and beautiful lace-trimmed underclothes, and gloves and handkerchiefs and furs. "I should like her always to look as if she was a child with a good mother," said Sarah. "I'm her mother, though I am also going to make a companion of her." Captain Crewe would really have enjoyed the shopping tremendously, but that a sad thought kept tugging at his heart. This all meant that he was going to be separated from his beloved, quaint little comrade. He got out of his bed in the middle of that night and went and stood looking down at Sarah, who lay asleep with Emily in her arms. Her black hair was spread out on the pillow, and Emily's golden brown hair mingled with it. Both of them had lace-ruffled nightgowns, and both had long eyelashes, which lay and curled up on their cheeks. Emily looked so like a real child that Captain Crewe felt glad she was there. He drew a big sigh, and he pulled his mustache with a boyish expression. "Hi-ho, little Sarah," he said to himself. I don't believe that you could know how much your daddy will miss you." The next day, he took her to Miss Minchin's and left her there. He was to sail away the next morning. He explained to Miss Minchin that his solicitors, Messrs. Barrow and Skipworth, had charge of his affairs in England and would give her any advice that she wanted, and that they would pay the bills that she sent in for Sarah's expenses. He would write to Sarah twice a week, and she was to be given every pleasure she asked for. "She is a very sensible little thing, and she never wants anything that isn't safe to give her," he said. Then he went with Sarah into her little sitting room, and they bade each other goodbye. Sarah sat on his knee and held the lapels of his coat in her small hands and looked long and hard at his face. Captain Crewe stroked her hair and asked, "Are you learning me by heart, little Sarah?" "No," she answered. "I know you by heart. You are inside my heart." They put their arms round each other and they kissed, as if they would never let each other go. When the cab drove away from the door, Sarah was sitting on the floor of her sitting room. One second. Ugh. Can't see the words on the page. I'm crying. It's all right. I'm crying tears of joy, ultimately, because I know how the book turns out. When the cab drove away from the door, Sarah was sitting on the floor of her sitting room with her hands under her chin and her eyes following it until it had turned the corner of the square. Emily was sitting by her, and she looked after it too. When Miss Minchin sent her sister, Miss Amelia, to see what the child was doing, she found that she could not open the door. "I have locked it," said a queer, polite little voice from inside. "I want to be quite by myself, if you please." Miss Amelia was fat and dumpy and stood very much in awe of her sister. She was really the better-natured person of the two, but never disobeyed Miss Minchin. She went downstairs again, looking almost alarmed. "I never saw such a funny old-fashioned child, sister," she said. "She has locked herself in, and she is not making the least particle of noise." Miss Minchin answered, "Well, it is much better than if she had kicked and screamed, as some of them do. I expected that a child so much spoiled as she is would set the whole house in an uproar. If ever a child was given her own way in everything, she is." Miss Amelia smiled. "I have been opening her trunks and putting her things away. I never saw anything like them, sister. Sable and ermine on her coats, real Valenciennes lace on her underclothing. You've seen some of her clothes. What do you think of them?" "I think they are perfectly ridiculous," replied Miss Minchin sharply. "But they will look very well at the head of the line when we take the school children to church on Sunday. She has been provided for as if she were a little princess." Upstairs in the locked room, Sarah and Emily sat on the floor and stared at the corner around which the cab had disappeared, while Captain Crewe looked backward, waving and kissing his hand as if he could not bear to stop. That is the end of chapter 1.